Jonah Goldberg, really one of my favorite writers and one of the best. He is just a terrific writer. He is the senior editor at National Review. He writes columns for the Los Angeles Times. He's the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Liberal Fascism, which I say this in the interview, is an epoch-making book. You should read it. It changes everything. It's the secret history of the American left from Mussolini to the politics of meaning. He also wrote The Tyranny of Cliches, How Liberals Cheat in the War of Ideas. He's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Just a great writer and a good guy. Here is my interview with Jonah Goldberg. Oh, good. This is like talking to a Bond villain now.
That's the look I'm going for.
So if you say anything wrong, if I say anything wrong, I'll disappear in like a shower of sparks, and my chair will go into the floor. I know.
I expect you to die, Mr. Slater.
So, as I will have already said, kind of unctuously when I introduce you, I have always found you one of the very best political writers in the country. I think you are. First of all, you're a terrific writer, and your book "Liberal Fascism" I think was epoch-making, as I told you at the time. But you are now in a position, a really interesting position, vis-a-vis the President of the United States. And sure. Let's start with the National Review Against Trump issue, which came out with this big Against Trump and some of the biggest names in the conservative movement. Are you sorry that happened? Do you think that was a mistake, or you're fine with it?
Rich Lowry would be a better person to ask about that. And I do think that it gets misunderstood. You know, it was partly my idea, but I don't call the shots at NR. Rich does, or at least he thinks he does. But I think that historically it will redound to our benefit. I think it gets misunderstood by a lot of people who call it the Never Trump issue. There are lots of people who contributed to it who were, in fact, became sort of Trump supporters. At least I believe there are. It came out on the eve of the Iowa caucuses, so it was before a single vote had been cast. And the reaction to it, I have to say, was not the best moment for a lot of people. I was amazed by how many people, colleagues and friends of mine on Fox News, would say things like, "How dare the National Review try to tell voters who to vote for?" And like, what do you think political magazines do? I mean, what do you think an endorsement is? I mean, and so it was very interesting as sort of a die marker about the populist moment when it came out, where we got lumped in with these outrageous elites in the establishment trying to tell people what to think, when that's actually sort of been part of National Review's mission for better part of 60 years.
Right.
Not to tell people what to think, but to make arguments for a certain position. So I don't know. I think you can make the case corporately that it was a mixed bag and alienated a lot of people. I'm perfectly willing to defend it till I'm blue in the face on the grounds that what we were in effect doing was endorsing the field against Donald Trump. And I don't see anything as a major intellectual or philosophical or journalistic criteria that says that was a bad idea. It might have been bad marketing. It might have pissed off a lot of people, but I'm fine with all that.
So where do you stand now? I mean, now we're a year in. You're looking at the Trump administration. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly sympathetic to sort of the Ben Shapiro formulation, even though I don't use it much myself, of, you know, good Trump, bad Trump. Right. I think that I don't, to the consternation of a lot of people, I don't use the term Never Trump anymore because I think it's meaningless once the guy gets elected. And as I wrote the day after the election, I was actually in a shockingly good mood because, first of all, Hillary Clinton wasn't president, which is just awesome. And at the same time, I tend to call myself a Trump skeptic, which I remain. And I think that Trump has done a lot of good things. Court picks are great. I think some of the regulatory stuff is really good. Some of it is overhyped. If you look at the specifics, I think some foreign policy stuff has been pretty good. But I'm also someone who believes in the importance of rhetoric in the classical sense of shaping how people think about important issues. And I think on those sorts of things, not just the Twitter account, but obviously that's the best example of it. But on that sort of front, I think he's been very damaging to the conservative brand, to the Republican cause. I don't care that much about the Republican Party. I was never much of a team party guy. I've always, and I'm very proud of calling myself a conservative. And I think, but long term, I think he has done significant damage to both brands.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because I have to say that I was, first of all, like everybody, completely taken aback by his victory. I had the exact same reaction that you had, that I was stunned at how happy I was in the moment. I mean, I thought it was a victory. There was no question. And I wonder if maybe victory doesn't look like what we thought it looked like. So, for instance, let's talk about the Twitter and whether he's damaging the brand. People like us keep saying, well, he's doing, I like a lot of what he's doing, but that Twitter account, but maybe what he's doing and the Twitter account are all one thing. Maybe we're missing something that he sees that we don't. Is that possible?
It's possible. I'm very skeptical of that. I think any attempt to fit Trump's actions into some grand vision of governing or philosophy of politics, any of that kind of stuff, is a classic example of intellectuals wanting to impose meaning on generally chaotic events. And I don't think Trump is motivated by some overarching philosophy about almost, not entirely nothing, but almost nothing. I think he's, he had the same view. He's had the same views, wrong views by my lights, about trade for the last 30 years, and he's consistent on that. I think the way he talks about, national interest in America first is bad. But I think that both hardcore Trump supporters and hardcore sort of Trump resistance people, who I think have behaved stupidly, want him to have want there to be some more meat to Trumpism than his own sort of glandular lizard brain in the moment actions. And we've seen that there's very little to Trumpism without the persona of Trump himself. Bannon tries to make it into something, and whatever he's trying to make it into, I think, is garbage, and nasty and bad for the country and bad for conservatism. But there's a reason why Bannon was fired. It was because he was actually trying to hold a consistent line on something. The guys like Julius Kreins, or however you pronounce his name, they very much wanted to have an intellectual forum to defend Trumpism, not necessarily Trump. It turns out you can't, because eventually your loyalties are torn between a coherent ideological agenda and his actual actions. And since Trump, as a matter of philosophy and psychology, cannot stick to a coherent ideological line beyond his own sort of cult of self personality, you either have to choose between an ideological agenda or loyalty to the man himself. And I think we've seen that over and over again.
Now, let me go back to something you said, because one useless, meaningless argument that I've been making for years is that the conservatives don't pay enough attention to the culture. And when you said
I agree with that.
The America, first thing is bad, it's damaging. Mm-hmm. When I watch Trump with the NFL, for instance, I think he's doing something actually important. It goes up my spine as a coastal elite. It goes right up the back of my neck. But why should we accept? I mean, every country has its games. They always are a place for patriotism and for national unity. Why should we accept people disrespecting the flag? Obviously, they have the right to do it, and nobody's challenging that. But why shouldn't the president come out and dismiss that and attack that? Isn't that a good thing for the country?
Oh, look, I agree with him largely on the merits of the issue. And if he were a Fox News pundit saying those things, I would agree with him almost entirely, I think. But he's not that. He's the president of the United States. And one of the things that I think is valuable at sports, and I am perfectly willing to concede that Kaepernick and those guys went first, right? I mean, they're the ones who initially made the problem, is that it's supposed to be a safe harbor from politics. And one of the things I do not like, one of the things I've argued from liberal fascism and before and onward and ever since, is that I think politics should be a very small part of our lives. And by joining that battle, when it was basically dying, right? I mean, the kneeling stuff was on its way out. You may agree with him on the merits. I think what he did was actually damage the NFL, and he did it for reasons that had more to do with wanting to be in the news, wanting to be in the headlines again, capture everybody's attention, and distract from other storylines, which I don't think is the most laudable process, and I don't think, or reasoning or motive, and I don't think what it served to do was actually politicize these institutions even more and sports more.
You know, I can't help feeling, though, that he has this feel. I mean, he was a TV star for 10 years. I can't help feeling that he has this feel for certain things that maybe more thoughtful people don't. You know, he reminds me a little bit of Randall Patrick McMurphy, the hero of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, who really is not a good person. He's a brawler. He's a kind of a thug. If you met him in real life, you probably wouldn't like him very much. But he comes into a system of soft oppression that I think would have been locked in place by a Hillary Clinton victory. And maybe we needed a ruffian a little bit to break that up. Is that possible?
Sure, that's possible. And again, I don't think that everything he's done, even on the football stuff, has been an unalloyed evil or bad thing. I just have a very hard time ascribing to him motives of some grander ideological agenda other than himself. And when you say, what you're offering, it sounds like a version of, I find this all the time. Well, I'll meet Republicans who will say, well, maybe the tweeting is really working for him. And I was like, okay, well, give me some metric of that, right? He's got the lowest approval ratings in the history of polling. He has galvanized opposition to him. He's making it harder for Republicans to actually carry out his agenda. I mean, for instance, this gets to the point about the lizard brain thing. If you vote for Donald Trump's agenda in the House and the Senate, but criticize him verbally, the Bannonistas will destroy you. Trump will go after you. But if you screw with his agenda, actually do something real to thwart his agenda, but suck up to him, they lavish you with praise. Ben Sass and Corker and even Flake vote consistently with the Trump agenda, and they're being essentially pelted from the party to one extent or another, and from conservatism. Meanwhile, Rand Paul has probably single-handedly done more to undermine the Trump agenda in Congress than anybody else, but because he sucks up to him in public, he gets no grief from anybody. This what's his name, Zeldin, just voted against the tax bill, which is hugely important for Republicans, for Trump's legacy. It's the only shot he has of having a single major legislative accomplishment in his first year. And so when Zeldin voted against it, Paul Ryan canceled a fundraiser with him. And on the grounds of sort of trying to impose discipline and whip the caucus into supporting the Trump agenda. And what does Bannon and his team do? They rush in to throw a fundraiser for him, because for them, anything that hurts the establishment is bad, even when the establishment is the one carrying the water for Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell has done more for Donald Trump's legacy than Steve Bannon has. Yeah. Right? He's the one who got Gorsuch on there. He's the one who's greenlighting all of these judges. But because Bannon has this idea that the establishment is bad, and Trump basically just wants sycophants, you get this cockeyed, absolutely moronic approach to the legislative agenda. And so I have a hard time squaring that with competing claims that, he's this 4D chess player, he's trying to work in, he has some grand strategy to all this. I think he lives in the moment, and he listens to the people who have his ear, and he doesn't want to get crosswise with Bannon for cynical political reasons. He's supporting Roy Moore, who I think, even if he wasn't an accused child molester, I think is going to be catastrophic for the Republican brand. I think, I wrote that conservatives should be denouncing him before any of these accusations came out, because I think he's a theocratic bigot and a crank and a grifter.
But it's kind of more on Bannon than it is on Trump, right? I mean, Bannon went in and promoted him when Trump was against him, and now he's stuck wanting that vote. He's got to get that vote in the Senate.
Yeah, no, that's all fine, and I think you can actually. I'm far more sympathetic to Trumpism,
right?
Because I think it's more harmless in a lot of ways than Bannonism. Yeah. But at the same time, he's the president of the United States. He's the head of the party. He's the guy who hired this guy and gave him a profile. And so at some point, it's on him. I mean, FDR had lots of people that he used to build his coalition and pit factions against factions. but that was because he was actually a chess player. I don't think Trump is a chess player.
You know, I have a lot more to ask you, but I'm almost out of time. Let me ask you this one last question. If you could connect the dots into the unknowable future, where you get the best Trump outcome, so that 4 years from now we have, you know, it's just exactly what you would have wanted from this moment, what would that look like?
I don't know that that can be salvaged at this point. If you look at the number of Republicans who no longer call themselves Republicans, just simply since 2016, if you look at the unbelievably hard feelings among millennials who are going to be, or now a bigger demographic than the baby boomers. You know, baby boomers are dying out, literally.
Right.
And politics is supposed to be about addition, not subtraction. And so I think a lot of the damage to the brand has been done. That said, look, if the tax bill, which I think is possible, leads to a big economic boom, I'm in favor of cutting the corporate tax rate. I think that makes a lot of sense. You could see the economy going well and Trump plausibly taking some credit for it. A lot of this has to do with how he responds to North Korea and all of these kinds of things. His legacy on the judiciary, I think, is as good as any other Republicans would have been, and in some ways maybe even better. I do think that that's in part because he doesn't care about it and just basically outsources it to the Federalist Society. But I think it's possible. I mean, I think it's entirely possible that we'll look back 4 years later and say there's been a lot of progress. But I don't think it's possible to say that there hasn't been a lot of damage.
Interesting. Jonah, thanks so much for coming on. I hope you come back. I have a lot more things I want to interrogate you
I'm
about.
happy to do it.
All right. That's good.
Tell you what, I'll have you on my podcast and we do the same thing for an hour.
Excellent. I'll be there. Jonah Goldberg, really one of my favorite writers. You should subscribe to his newsletter at NRO. It's always really, really entertaining.